Hello, I'm David Stewart Davis. I'm a writer, the editor of Sherlock magazine, and author of Bending the Willow, Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes. Here to talk about The Red Circle, along with
Jeremy Paul. I dramatised The Red Circle.
And The Red Circle was one of the films in the last Granada series, the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. And according to Jeremy Brett himself, it was the favourite from this particular series. Can you tell us a little bit about how this particular episode came about then, Jeremy?
As you say, it was one of the last ones, and we'd done two-hour The Master Blackmailer and The Last Vampire, which we thought was going to be the way the series was going to progress. Oh, and there was another.
The Ineligible Bachelor, yeah.
Yes. And The Red Circle, as I think you're reminding me and I'm remembering now, was written actually before these and put aside, and then when it was decided to go back to the 1 hour format, we came back to doing it. I think perhaps there was a moment where it wasn't going to be done at all. So you have to correct my memory on that, Dave.
Well, it was a great time of change at independent television. And initially, June Wyndham Davis, the producer of the series, had thought that they, as you say, they were going to go ahead with 2-hour productions. After the success, particularly of The Master Blackmailer, which you scripted, and then there was The Last Vampire and The Ineligible Bachelor. Trevor Bowen was the scriptwriter for that. And so that's the way she thought she was going. And in fact, this very briefly was a moment when I almost had a moment of glory, because they contacted me for some ideas, because they thought that the remaining stories that hadn't been filmed by Granada, the Conan Doyle ones, were not strong enough to develop into 2-hour formats. So I was contacted to see, as a writer of Holmes stories, what I got up my sleeve. I was halfway through a novel and told them about it, and they said that sounded interesting. Would I send them what I'd written and a synopsis of the final element of it? To cut a long story short, they liked what they read and said, yes, we'll do it. And in fact, they were going to get you to do the screenplay. And then the powers that be at ITV said, oh, no, we don't want any more 2 hours. We want 6 1-hour episodes, and we need them by Christmas. And this was sort of in the spring of that year, and so June Wyndham Davis became frantic to get these 6 programmes together. One of the things she did, she went back to your script of The Red Circle, which is one of the later stories. It was written in 1911 by Conan Doyle, originally called The Bloomsbury Lodger, wisely changed to The Red Circle, I think. What problems did you have with dramatising?
The later stories got, in a sense, harder and harder by the obvious sense that we went early for the ones that looked easier. But the later stories, which became a challenge that could be as satisfying as doing an easier story. The Red Circle had a problem, which was that all the dark areas of it were reported and not seen or dramatised. In fact, Black Georgiano, the villain, only really turns up dead at the end. So one had the challenge of going back and reconstructing the drama that caused the denouement. And I always found that rather a satisfying thing to do. And there was a clue that Conan Doyle gave me right at the end of the story, which is, it's a Wagner evening. I think we're just in time for the second act, which was a throwaway last line to the end. The story had been completed. He says this to Watson. And I picked up on that and I thought, well, he loves Wagner. Let's see if I can weave in a secondary story, which the story needs because it was so thin, that sprang out of mafia dealings at New York, which I'd already been given, and the use of Wagner.
So this is why you created this new character, which is not in the story, Enrico Fermani.
Yes, because it had to be someone in this country that was dealing with people fleeing and having to be repatriated, fleeing from the terror of the Red Circle or from any Sicilian mafia situation. And in the story there is the character that Mrs. Warren says that Holmes had helped in the past. So I substituted that because that was a story that was going nowhere in particular for this whole concept of the man in London secretly trying to help good guys get away from bad guys.
And of course, by doing that, you also brought the knowledge of the Red Circle into Britain, because in the story they just discover what the Red Circle is during the course of the events, rather than having prior
And as always,
knowledge.
it's just exposition. It has no dramatic content at all. It's just people telling people what they can't see, or what an audience can't see. So you have to really create the world of it happening. And again, this is the point where it's quite interesting for an audience, because they get a little bit ahead of Holmes. They see things that Holmes hasn't seen. So there's a moment where clues are being, or some evidence is being put in front of them that Holmes has to catch up on, which I think is quite interesting for the audience to feel maybe they could be Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, and you extended the sort of tightness of it. If you can't extend tightness, I suppose, but you involved tightness by having Mrs. Warren as a friend of Mrs. Hudson.
Oh, that was a very good, and that was almost a sort of executive reason. As time went on, Rosalie Williams had been doing such wonderful work on the edges of the stories, and not often getting a chance to get into the action. And it gave her a chance to take some of the weight off Mrs. Warren. Otherwise, Mrs. Warren, in those early scenes, would have just simply been talking and talking and talking.
Right.
So the idea that it was a friend, and it was logical, they're two landladies, and that would make Holmes have to be slightly more attentive to this woman that's come out of the blue if Mrs. Hudson's brought her. That just helped the dynamic of the scene, really.
Well, I told him 12 shillings a week. There's a small sitting room and a bedroom, all complete, all at the top of the house. And he said he'd pay me £3 a week for it.
£3?
Yes, sir, £3 a week, as long as I kept his terms.
What terms?
Well, he wanted a key to the house. Well, that's all right, most of my lodgers have them. But he was to be left entirely to himself, and never on any account to be disturbed.
There's nothing very wonderful about that.
Oh, well, not in reason, but this is out of all reason. He's been there 10 days, morning, noon and night, and neither she nor Mr. Warren nor the maid has once set eyes on him.
And apart from the first night, he's never once gone out.
Oh, he did go out on the first night?
Oh, yes, he did. He returned very late. I'd gone to bed. But Mr. Warren saw him. It was after midnight he'd come back.
These meals, I mean, surely he eats.
Well, he rings when he wants them. We put them on a chair outside his door. If he wants...
And also one of the elements that has been evident in all your scripts, really, is giving Watson more work to do.
Yes.
And you do that in this particular episode, and in this particular scene coming up now, where in the original story, Mrs. Warren presents Holmes with some notes that he makes deductions about. But here, Holmes hands the notes over to Watson and says deduce, which is a nice little bit to show, to some extent, how Watson is actually picking up on Holmes's techniques.
Yes.
Here we go with the notes. And so you're sharing dialogue to some extent.
Yes.
Because the dialogue you give Watson is from the story.
That's right. But it's again... That is to do with dramatisation, that what reads on the page perfectly easily doesn't transfer always to a visual dynamic.
And Edward Hardwicke, I think, is absolutely brilliant in this episode, and it really brings Watson to the fore and helps to establish that it isn't a stooge and the master.
No,
there is
it's a shared thing.
Yes.
And I think as the later stories came on, we did this more and more. It built up Watson in a way that was part of the original brief of the series, which was he wasn't a buffoon, he wasn't old, he was a soldier, he had a good mind, he had a mind at least on the same level as the pretty brightest members of an audience. So he could represent their thinking, and then Holmes could come in and top it with brilliance. But we and Watson shared the platform of intelligence and even fanciful action. We could say, if Watson in that situation is brave, he takes on a brute on a roof or something. We could do that. So we were helping the whole participation factor, which all thrillers have to have.
Love the wink here. He does the wink. In that scene that we've just seen, Holmes says to Mrs. Warren and Mrs. Hudson, vanish.
Yes.
Now, I'm presuming that's not you.
It was not me.
That was Jeremy's view of being sort of
It raises another interesting point, which is that Holmes in this episode, as you'll see, I mean, he's clearly in a disturbed state. Something is troubling him. First of all, he's wearing his hair on peculiarly, and it changes through the episode.
It goes very severe later on, yes.
And Watson is used to the mood swings. Conan Doyle always indicates the mood swings are always there, inherent in the character. Most dramatisations before Jeremy would never play the mood swing. They would play the centre. He would be the still point Sherlock, around which all the crimes would revolve, and often Watson would be the stumbling figure. But it helps Watson to be the still point, which is one of the initial things that Conan Doyle asked, around a circulating and demonic personality.
I think that's a very interesting point. I think you're absolutely right that often we are told about the irregularity of behaviour of Holmes, but in the stories that are dramatised we often don't see it.
So the vanish came out of Holmes being shockingly rude to Mrs. Hudson, and everybody dealing with it in their own different ways. And the wink is really saying, don't worry, Mrs. Hudson, I'm with you, and it's just a mood, and I'll handle it.
Yes.
And that's enriching the whole household.
Himself. Why send you, Dr. Watson?
Well, I do on occasion act for myself.
Well,
what puzzles me to some extent, and I think possibly it is, again, Jeremy, rather than your script, what is the real strong nature of the relationship between Fermani and Holmes? Because he seems very involved in this character.
Yes.
And I mean, later on we will see more evidence of that. But even now, we're aware that he feels some strong connection with Fermani.
I think, to be absolutely fair, Fermani himself was surprised at the intensity that he had brought on Holmes, because it wasn't in the intention of the writer. There are lots of ways of explaining it. I mean, there was a sense that Jeremy was saying at these later stages, give me a new challenge, give me something more to do. I need an inner life, I need something. I've done everything I can do with this character. I need to explore some deeper, darker side. And he more or less conjured it up himself and played it in. And to some extent, all around him watched in sort of awe.
Yes.
Including the director, I suspect, certainly the writer, and possibly one or two of the actors.
Well, Jeremy
he went into a very secret place.
Well, Jeremy always used to say about directors that he said, I'm Bambi, that was his phrase, and I lay down and let them do what they want. But I'm sure, particularly in the later series, that the directors were in awe, as you say, of Jeremy. He'd been playing Sherlock Holmes for nearly 10 years.
There are certain things also you can't question. You can't. If the director saw this, Sarah said, I don't like this. There isn't time in the shoot to discuss it, and certain things with certain kinds of instinctive actors are not to be discussed. All you can do is cut if you really don't like it. You can't go to Jeremy Brett and say, Jeremy, can we talk about that little moment where you said vanish? You said, because he would say, I just don't work like that. Don't discuss it.
And people would presumably be sort of respectful of him because he'd been doing it for so long and of his knowledge of Holmes, and would bow down to that.
And the magic of what he produced and those moments, those extra moments, is what makes it often the performance. He takes it a step further and leaves to some extent the rest of us behind. And I don't have any trouble with that. There are fail breaks if things go slightly wrong, if there's a misjudgment, because you can edit it in a certain way, you can get out of it in a certain way. But you want to let dangerous actors and genius fly loose.
Yes. I think you would agree that Jeremy was a genius.
Yeah, I have no doubts about that.
He's a point of refuge for the Italian community in London. A beacon of light, if you will, in a dark web of devilry.
The Red Circle. God. And this Georgiano.
The motif of the red circle we've already seen earlier with the ring on the table, sort of left by the wine glass or whatever leaves the red. That was nicely done throughout this particular episode, and there's a scene coming up where they go to the theatre and there's a red spotlight, which again is wonderfully sort of threatening and illuminating on the sort of the idea of the red circle.
Yes, I would love to think that I'd written that. I suspect I hadn't, but what you can do is to create a climate in the writing that allows the director to see it. I can't remember writing that for the director. That's what the director finds.
Now this scene is, we encounter the villain of the piece, which in the original story, as we both agreed, only appears dead at the end. So we have to actually, for a TV production, we have to actually encounter him beforehand. So we engender some knowledge and some hatred of him, I suppose. And here he is, John Hallam.
Yes.
This is a wonderful scene, and I don't know whether you had the Phantom of the Opera in mind when this was conceived, with the man being killed over the stage and hanging down with a bloody chest.
I think I just said he gets killed, and I think Sarah did the rest.
Oh, right. Because it is very, very Phantom of the Opera.
Yes, because sometimes, a writer mustn't pretend to be the director. It's very tempting sometimes. But he's not directing. He's giving the information that allows the director their full... I mean, that's wonderful. You couldn't write that in a script.
Could you not? Because it is wonderful. And the freeze frame there of the girl.
You'd be half directing it, and they say, oh, he wants to direct it.
Right.
What would you be doing for the director if you did all their work for them?
Nobody's allowed in here. Oh, it's you, Mr. Holmes.
This was a very troubled series. This was the second film to be shot, because as we said earlier, John Wyndham Davies had to get it off the stocks pretty quickly in order to meet the deadline of the following January. The first episode was The Golden Pince-Nez, and Edward Hardwicke wasn't available to play Watson in that, because he was filming Shadowlands with Anthony Hopkins at the time. So Charles Gray as Mycroft was sort of brought in to be the foil, if you like. So that was, if you like, a slightly faulty episode. This came next, which is the only one which runs smoothly. Then there was The Three Gables, which you also scripted.
Yes.
But Jeremy was very ill on that. They had to stop shooting for a while while he was taken into hospital with his illness. And then when that was completed, he had to go back into hospital. And so The Dying Detective, which was next to be scheduled, had to be delayed by a month, which obviously was an expensive procedure.
Yes.
On the wrap-up party of The Dying Detective, which was also Jeremy's 60th birthday, he had what he described as a whiteout, and he was taken into a mental hospital. And there was all this complication with his health, where he was being treated for his heart condition, and also for his mental instability, which had caused him to have a tremendous amount of water retention, which again was an added problem which weakened his heart. It was really nasty. He was so ill that he wasn't able to do the penultimate programme, which was the Mazarin Stone. And so again, we had Watson in it and Mycroft. And then after Christmas of that year, Jeremy came back, but only able to film every other day because he was so ill, to complete the last programme, which was a cardboard box.
Yes.
So in many ways, this really is the only trouble-free programme that we've got in the series, and probably the best as a result of that, apart from obviously the excellent script.
Do you remember, I think it's particularly in the Three Gables, which was when Jeremy was really struggling for health, and therefore for lines and just energy. It did allow Watson to assume much more the central role. It's almost as if he'd come to the apprenticeship was over, and in this, in a curious way, enriched the Watson that we ended up with.
Yes.
And certainly gave Edward a lot of better stuff than he would have done on a normal run-in.
Yes.
So that was a bonus, I think. I mean, you make a virtue of sadness and difficulty.
Well, it was very sad the way that Jeremy declined. I mean, I do know that I think it was during the filming of Three Gables that they did This Is Your Life for Edward Hardwicke, and they surprised him on set, of course, when Jeremy was there. But it was at the time when Jeremy was in a wheelchair with oxygen, so he couldn't actually appear on the show, which surprised people because they thought, well, he'd be one of the guests.
And then everyone gets into a sort of media frenzy and say, oh, they didn't get on, which is the last thing that was true.
Oh, absolutely. They were the best of friends. And Edward was terribly generous to Jeremy when he was ill, and even letting him convalesce at his home and so forth.
Well, Edward's the most modest of men.
He is indeed. Now this is again a scene from the story where the man is kidnapped, thinking it's the Italian, and thrown out on Hampstead Heath, which presumably was somewhere around Manchester, but doubling as Hampstead Heath.
Now, in order to make that particularly coherent and meaningful, I had to create the Kenneth Connor part before he was thrown out of the cab. Otherwise, it was just a man.
Absolutely.
So that's why we set him up making model boats and with Betty Marsden.
I'm with you. Now, isn't it interesting? I mean, June Wyndham Davis was a past mistress, I suppose is the phrase, of encouraging people who either had retired or had not done a lot of TV work recently to come into the series. And we've got two examples in this one with Betty Marsden and Kenneth Connor there. Kenneth Connor, a stalwart of the Carry On films.
But what a bonus for us and for the writers to be able to call on Betty Marsden and Kenneth Connor for supporting roles, to give it that edge. That's where nowadays you can get very good actors playing small parts because of the sort of, particularly for the older characters, the lack of parts. So people are prepared to do things which they weren't prepared to do maybe 20, 30 years ago.
But also casting against type to some extent with Kenneth Connor really. Rather like in an earlier episode, Eric Sykes appeared in, I think it was The Six Napoleons, the journalist in The Six Napoleons.
Not to mention her way of bringing wonderful stars at the age of 100, Gwen Franken Davis.
Yes, who appeared in The Master Blackmailer. Yes. And she was in a retirement home or something.
Yes. And she came and everyone looked after her, and she didn't need any of that. She just needed to be got there and back safely, but she knew every line. She never fluffed a line. And all the old magic was there on view. And, you know, all you did was pay homage.
Right.
And she was happy with that.
Did you observe that appearance?
No, sir, no. I was picked up as if by magic and dropped as if by magic. Yes. 3 of them at least was in on it. Maybe 4.
Did you hear them talk?
One of them swore some oaths in Italian.
Did you visit any of the filming on this? Do you know where that, the streets are? The old couple streets are?
I can't remember.
Presumably somewhere in the Manchester area.
Yes, they must have been.
But there again, we're back to the business of not being able to film on Baker Street anymore.
Yes.
Because of the Granada Studios tour, as it was.
Yes.
I know Jeremy refused to wear anything other than black towards the end because he was very conscious of his weight, which accumulated because of his illness rather than any sort of eating disorder. And the blue coat that he wore in an earlier episode, The Speckled Band, he would never wear anything light at all because his black makes you look slimmer. And he was very conscious of it and very unhappy about it.
That shot is really skillful. That's where black and a certain way of holding him, and the fact that his head is still a lean head.
There's no thinking.
But they didn't. Do you see what I see?
A house with a porch and black door.
With a room to let, to which G could have access.
Holmes, I feel very strongly that we should inform Scotland Yard.
Not yet. We are on watch. And may be being watched. Let us see what lies behind these lodgings.
So the structure of the story concerning Black Georgiana, you've had to bring him in earlier than Dole's story, and then you've got the problem of the girl in the room.
Yes.
You had to break that about a bit, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I had to put her in danger, proper danger. So if he's in town, then he is the source of danger for her. And there are a few red herring dangers. There's a moment where the maid, I think, sees Holmes coming through the roof.
There is. Now, I wanted to ask you about that. I wondered why you had Holmes coming through the roof at that.
I would think 2 reasons. One was to give a little scare moment.
Yes.
You call that a
Yes.
dramatic sleight of hand. And the other, to justify it, would be Holmes would be examining what ways in Georgiana might have.
I understand. Yeah.
You know, how secure is the room?
It's setting up his entrance,
yes,
really, isn't
yes.
it? Yes. Now, this scene is, again, straight out of Doyle, isn't it? And again, whenever you're able, I know, you use Doyle if the moment works.
Yep.
And here we've got the maid coming up and Holmes and Watson watching, and the mirror is placed in such a way that when the occupant of the room comes out, you can see her. And that's the cleverness of Doyle, conceiving that particular moment.
No, you don't have to change any of that.
Yeah.
And at this point it's quite exciting because you really probably aren't there for it being a woman, are you?
No. In the original story, when the woman comes back dressed as her husband, everyone's in bed.
Yes.
And in your version, she passes, and you see a person going up the stairs.
Yeah.
So that was very daring, really, wasn't it? And it sort of underlines the fact that it's not likely to be a woman.
Yeah.
Mr. Holmes.
Bolt your door and let no one in until we return.
Did you see him?
Mrs. Warren, trust me.
I don't know when he's coming back. He gave me some money and I haven't seen him since.
You had long conversations with Jeremy, didn't you, when he was quite ill? And he was keen to do another play with you, wasn't he?
Yes, although I think he knew he couldn't. It was a way of getting through, really. You've got to keep thinking there's something ahead.
Yes.
No, we talked a bit about this and that. I can't quite remember whether we fastened on to anything. It was apparent. And then actually right at the end he knew he wasn't going to act again, so he had to live through that.
That for a man whose life had been
but he
drama.
was ready to accept that. It was extraordinary, the last period. That's one of the wondrous things of, I mean, it's like sportsmen, isn't it, or anything. There's a moment where you say, that I can't do it and I'm happy to live with it. I will live. I think I'm reconciled to that. I think he was. I mean, because, you know, the energy wasn't there, really. He would only want to do it at his very best.
Yes. I remember he got very emotional about the adulation that he got from all kinds of people playing Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
And I went to interview him at his flat in Clapham on one occasion, and he showed me a letter from Douglas Fairbanks Jr. that he'd just got that day.
Yeah.
And I can't remember it exactly, but I do remember the phrase blithe boy, and it said, I never realised the blithe boy that I'd seen in My Fair Lady was in fact our wonderful Sherlock Holmes.
Oh.
And Jeremy was quite moved by that. He loved the idea of playing Holmes and the recognition that he'd brought to the character, because he used to say, they're using Doyle in schools now, you know, and he was really sort of quite excited about that.
Well, he was in the classical dilemma of being an incredibly good-looking young man who, at a certain point when the looks would certainly change, it wouldn't go, but it could have been that there was no career for him. He was a certain kind of Englishman, he was an Etonian. The fashion for that class thing had gone past, really. He could have gone back to the classics, but he'd been through a lot of classical theatre acting with Laurence Olivier in the early National Theatre days. And he was looking for a part. And this was it. They met together at the right time. Which, if it hadn't happened, his career would have probably been in great difficulty.
Yes.
And I think he knew that. And once he got on to that fact, he gave it everything.
Yes, because there was an air of flamboyancy with Jeremy, which in other parts perhaps wouldn't have been acceptable, but with Holmes it was quite appropriate.
He could have become a sort of maverick character actor in extravagant, probably Ken Russell films.
Yes.
I think that we should pool our resources.
Now, we've just seen Inspector Hawkins.
Yes.
And also...
Who's he, you're about to say?
Pardon?
Are you about to say who's
Well,
he?
indeed. He's a non-canonical character, not used by Conan Doyle, but I'm assuming it's to do with actors available and so forth.
It must have been that. I'm sure it was. So therefore I invented Inspector Hawkins.
Because he appears in several of the other episodes in this particular series. They certainly...
Well, they got Tom Shadbolt, isn't it?
It is,
yes.
yeah.
Who was a good actor, and put him to use.
Right.
Or did they do that before me? Did I inherit him? That I'm not sure.
I think you're the first person to use it.
Yeah. I had a feeling I'd have created.
It was Gregson in the original story.
Yes.
I'm assuming that Gregson had been played by Dennis Lill.
Yes.
In previous episodes, and I'm assuming possibly he wasn't available.
It was that. There was nothing else that I knew about.
Yeah. It was interesting. You used the lines from the story, Shakespeare quote, "Journey's end in lovers meeting."
Yes.
You also included a quote from Cymbeline about the children coming to dust.
But you know who did that?
No, is it Jeremy, was it? Oh, right.
I took the line out of Doyle, and then suddenly Cymbeline turned up, and I thought, oh, what a smart adapter I am. So, I don't know where he found that, why he felt he needed that, but I was happy in the sense that it was part of my feeling that Holmes in this story is in a dangerous state of mind. He's actually almost the only thing that really gets him back on track is the case itself. But I think he's thinking about lots of other things.
Yes.
And as always with Holmes, going back, is he's only fully alive when he's got a case.
Yes.
So it made sense, even though I wondered if he'd made the right choice of quote. I didn't know. Well, we were going into a place that it wasn't adding much.
I suppose to some extent it was underlining his feelings about Marley, which we don't know the what
his
of us.
secret.
Yeah.
Yes.
This'll be the death of me.
Oh my God. I was born in Posillipo, near Naples. My father was chief lawyer. Gennaro had no money and no position, nothing. But his beauty, his strength and energy. My father forbade the match, and we ran away. We were married in Bari.
But here we get a lovely scene where...
she's a lovely actress. Sophie Diaz, yes.
Well, we also see Holmes being very sympathetic and very good with a woman.
That's right.
And we get flashbacks here to fill in the...
We have to recreate now the story we've seen snatches
Oh no,
of.
this is always, to me, marvellous about Granada, because this is a brief moment.
Yes.
But the set and everything, it really is brilliantly done, isn't it?
Yes.
Just for a story point.
Otherwise the story doesn't have any resonance. If you cheapskate that,
Do you know her from other things? Right.
No, she just came along. Again, I don't know what has happened to her. I hope all is well with her.
It's interesting that the actor playing Black Giorgiano is really taking up the elements from the Doyle story, because Doyle says he uses his arms a lot, and his big arms are sweeping about, and the actor, or maybe your script, I think.
Yes, well, I would have copied it out, and he'd have looked it up. I think I remember him saying, "What is there for me to play?" And I was, where are my lines, as it were? And I was saying, well, there aren't any.
Yes.
But it's in the story.
It was a deep, secret fear. I implored him out of love for me by all we held dear, to tell me why this man overshadowed him.
You go through the read-throughs.
Yes, always, yes.
And then,
So deal with
can you take us through that process? And what happens? You write the script. What happens from there on?
We all meet up, and it's often as much to do with the company meeting each other and the costume department and the technicalities. And usually all the script problems have been ironed out between the script editor, the producer and the director before that. So the actors are not necessarily part of any script changing, very rarely.
But presumably sometimes you've had to go, before it gets to that stage, you've had to go back and rewrite.
Oh, yes.
Can you give an example of anything from this story or any other story?
I honestly can't. It's a natural process. A first draft never sees the light of day. That's the first thing. Because often the writer is working out an awful lot of her own feeling towards the story. And then there is a process that if there is a really good script editor, a clear clinical eye, or the producer, and then the director saying, I see it this way because I want to shoot it that way, but that line gets in the way. Then we're in now something collaborative. Now, if all those relationships are good, there's no difficulty in rewriting. It's only when you're given a sheet of notes by somebody you don't know very well, called a script editor, and you say, no, these notes are meaningless. You don't know what I'm doing. This isn't working. And then you get into battles in which people have to take sides. You fight your corner. Somebody has to come along and arbitrate, and you compromise, and that's the way it works.
And presumably sometimes changes have to be made purely on the basis of finance.
Yeah.
Which must be very hard to take.
Yes, it is. There was a huge limitation of, there was a wonderful one. Was it Thor Bridge, was it? Winchester Assizes. It was very, very particularly Winchester. And I live quite near Winchester, and I went and felt it through in Winchester. And they said, we can't go to Winchester to film the Winchester sequences, the Assizes sequences. It has to be Chester. And I said, no, it can't be Chester, because Chester looks like Chester. And Winchester looks like Winchester. And the whole story is Thor Bridge. It's Hampshire. It keeps coming into the story.
Yes.
You can't just suddenly produce Chester. And they said, we can't do overnights. It costs a fortune. So I said, will you go close on Chester so that we don't see that it's Chester? And in a way, I think, and nobody recognised the fact that we were in the wrong part of the country.
But you would feel it.
I would be anxious for it, because I have a great feeling as a writer of place. I have to feel the solidity of location behind me. I have to know where I am. And I will go to places which I don't need to go to.
Really?
Yeah, just to feel now I can write the scene, and then they go and choose somewhere else. Well, that's different. That doesn't matter too much. But I can't just... I love travelling to my locations.
Right. And you get vibes from them.
Yeah, very much so. Very much. It's an excuse for a day out.
To a new life. Grazie.
Now here we are, Jeremy, out on the roof again.
Yes.
He's very happy going on roofs. He was on the roof in the Sign of 4.
And we start to get some interesting athleticism or jeopardy or whatever.
Well, this is jeopardy here, isn't it?
Yes, this is dangerous.
The two combatants facing each other, or aware of each other anyway.
Yeah.
But you had to get so much in towards the end of this story. You got to get the American agent in, and the signalling. Now that must have caused a problem, because the signalling in the story is a bit far-fetched.
It's what you might call a literary device.
Yes.
It certainly is not a visual dramatic device. Yes. There's no way. I had a little go at it. There's no way one could make any sense of it. I don't think Conan Doyle made any sense of it either. I think he was just busking.
Yes.
There's no way that he could disentangle a code like that, or the time it would take to do every letter with all that sort of...
Well, if we pull this in context, Conan Doyle killed Sherlock Holmes off at the Reichenbach Falls, and had done with him, and then eventually, because of pressure from publishers and offers of money, brought him back in the early years of the 20th century. This story was written in 1911, so it really is quite late, and obviously he was writing for money then, Conan Doyle, because he was on the verge of his interest in other things, particularly spiritualism, that came along in about 3 or 4 years' time. So he was always brilliant at coming up with wonderful concepts and ideas. Problems indeed, but not necessarily following them through.
No. And it's extraordinary for a man who has such a grasp of the drama, theatre, that he could ever concoct a story in which all the interesting characters, or the other side of the story, are completely stranded, that you never get to know, apart from when she tells the story, backstory. You never get to know the villain. You just kill the villain off, and you never get to know the good guy, the young husband.
Somewhere waiting his chance.
We have a good description from the American, Leviton. We'll be ready.
Look.
Oh, this is all lovely stuff. I love this.
And for a moment, we think this is Watson, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, no.
It's American.
No, because it's Chapmonter, yes.
Yes, it's American agent.
Yes.
And,
lovely actor called Kerry Shale. He does a lot of the audio books, Kerry Shale.
Oh, right, yes.
We were lucky to get him. He's got far too small a part for it. Plays Leviton.
So this is now a moment which Jeremy mentioned, that again he said that he organised because he wanted to go against Watson's comment earlier in the episode that he wasn't being involved in the investigation, he wasn't concerned enough. And Jeremy said, I proved it by being blooded. That letting of my blood, because he's cut there, cut on his cheek, shows
isn't
that...
Isn't it Leviton's blood? Is the cut there? Isn't he wiping off?
Well, wasn't
it a splash?
I thought it was his own cut.
He doesn't make much of it.
No, it doesn't. It may not have been filmed in sequence, of course, but I mean that, you know, as with the Cymbeline quote, it's something done at the moment in time. But that's again.
That's a good point. I think he may have splashed that on and then forgotten that we'd shot this scene. Are we giving away too many trade secrets here?
Possibly. It shows the mechanics of putting something like this together, which is for an hour of television, the amount of work and the thought and the sort of logistics. Strength of performances and strength of thoughts that go behind it, incredible.
Leviton Banam.
So Gennaro Luca is over there now?
Not yet, but he will be, I hope.
I couldn't find Luca when I got to London. Well, my contact was Enrico Fermani, but the brute reached him first. And he must have made him talk before killing him.
Should we not go upstairs to reassure Mrs. Luca?
She won't admit us, once.
I remember there's probably lots of day for night going on here, and you know, the having to shoot at the wrong time of day.
Well, I'm presuming that's another financial aspect of things, is it? That if you go into overtime or into the evening, you're paying more.
Yes.
He knows his business.
I don't remember too many night shoots, if any, actually.
This is a disappointing element of it because, in a sense, the signalling. Holmes is trying to make out something, but I mean, there's no code, is there, for him to work out? And it must have been very difficult for you to sort of conceive how...
Well, I think the boatman really wanted to surround this moment with other action, like we've just seen, to take off the problem that there is a real serious difficulty here. I remember that the decision for her to run across was coming, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yes. She's in the street, I
say. And they're suddenly saying, what's she doing, you know? Yeah. Was to gee up this whole area.
Yes, yes. Because, I mean, logically, if he's so close in a rented room across the road, why does he need to do that?
Well, because he possibly wants to snare Giorgiano, who he doesn't at this point know is in there. Is that right? Yes, he hasn't. Giorgiano. Yes, that's.
Yeah, Giorgiano
takes the whore in, as it were.
And this is a rare moment in all the Sherlock Holmes films where Holmes and Scotland Yard are working hand in glove, as it were, together. Because he says earlier, and I think we should pool our resources.
Well, there's a lovely line, isn't it, which I must have pinched from Gregson, which Doyle used, which we cottoned onto, which is always sort of almost, it's always a pleasure to work with you, Mr. Holmes.
Yes,
yes. That kind of line.
Yes.
And that's a nice change from what could be said to be the cliche. She's just saying, I'm here, 3 flashes, and that's the message.
So yes, presumably she has some sort of knowledge of what it means. But in the original, I think we're working out a tenter, I think is the...
Eventually.
Yes, which takes so many letters to, 2 T's, which if you go down the alphabet.
Slow.
What's he saying? What does it mean?
Nothing. But his next actions must confirm it. He must come here to collect her.
The nice thing about this episode, and I think probably you did it to help to clarify the complications, is that it starts with narration. And you've actually got the Watson voice, as we get in the stories with Edward Hardwick saying the case of the Red Circle.
Yes,
It started in America, ended in the Antipodes, I think.
I think that was needed because it was too vague. Silent, play that opening, without context.
Yes.
It needed some anchoring, even if it wasn't saying what it was about, to bring us into the story.
And so we now don't see the murder of that Georgiana. So again, a sort of
because you play the suspense of
a mini moment of
which
suspense.
one?
Yes.
Who's got who?
And I think that's good of Doyle, because with Doyle you don't know it's going to have a happy ending. There are so many that don't quite.
But this is when she runs across.
Yeah.
Does Doyle do that, or is that me?
That's you.
Yes, I thought so. Now there's real jeopardy now, because is her husband dead, and is he there?
And I think also, again, it may be the set designer or the director, but when we do see the body of Georgiano, round his head there's almost a red circle of blood, which I thought was a nice touch.
God, I wish I could claim that. I wonder if I did.
Yes.
Yes, that's the red circle.
Very accurate, but somehow annoying that Inspector Hawkins says, no, they can't go to Australia tomorrow. He takes the ticket off them. I know we do know they eventually get there, but you'd almost think
that... Well, I actually sharpened that up, because in the original, Gregson more or less apologetically says, well, I'm awfully sorry, but I think we're going to have to. But don't worry, it's all going to be fine.
Yes.
And so it's a totally soft ending. So I thought I'd sharpen that up a bit.
Yes. That's good, because it's exactly what a police officer would do, however, sort of sentimentally might feel.
Yeah.
And like so many of the Doyle stories, at the heart of it is passion and love, isn't it? Yeah.
Love is everywhere.
Yes.
And that's something that Conan Doyle understood.
All the greats, the Dancing Man and...
yeah. Oh, Thorbridge,
Yeah.
Our ship sails at dawn.
What are you going to do with him, Inspector?
He'll be arrested and tried for the murder of Georgiano. That is the law.
Well, I don't know what your British law may be, but I guess that in New York, this lady's husband will receive a pretty general vote of thanks.
There's not a judge on earth that will condemn this man. I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Luca have too much to fear. But we have to go through the procedures. Take them downstairs.
There's a lovely line Jeremy has at the end about justice as well, which I think is super, and he says it so well.
The law is what we live with, Inspector. Justice is sometimes harder to achieve.
See, what's so clever of that from Sarah is that it's on the move. He moves out of frame.
Yes.
To tell it.
Chadbourne is very good as Hawkins, isn't he? Yes, it's a really believable police inspector. And we still see this very disturbed Holmes.
Wagner, yeah.
Yes, that we started the programme
with.
And we go to the Wagner evening,
yeah.
which is supposed to be in Covent Garden, I think, probably.
Yes.
But it was actually filmed at Buxton Opera House.
Yes.
And according to June Wyndham Davis, Patrick Gower, the man who writes the music for the series, saw a rough cut of the programme and said, I saw the last shot of you at the Opera House in the box to Jeremy, and you looked as though you were enjoying the music. And really, I would have thought you'd have been thinking about your friend Fermani. And so for a last shot, they went back and had a close-up of Jeremy with tears in his eyes. And you just see it, it's actually just put in almost at the end of this. And of course the Wagner night is the last reference in the story which you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So now you've explained this idea of this trauma that maybe Holmes was feeling. That becomes much more understandable.
Yes.
I think.
Why should Holmes always let us into the secret places of his heart?
Absolutely, and a man with such a brain must have complications that we know not the what of.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for
Not at all, thank
taking
you.
us through that. That was good. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.